In this lesson, we'll look at a way we can create a turntable animation in Max. Turntables are used for modeling reels to show off a 360-degree shot of the character or prop or environment that has been modeled. So it's going to be very important that we learn how to create this type of effect or animate this type of camera shot for our models. So let's go ahead and create a basic camera rig and get this going. Underneath the create panel, we'll go ahead and create a target camera. I'll just go ahead and draw this out with the interest pointing towards the character. Right click to exit the tool. From here, what I'd like to do is go ahead and rename this shot camera just to clarify exactly what this camera is for. And so if we were to hand off this scene to anyone else, they would know which camera to render from. So with the camera selected, we can go ahead and just rename this to shot camera 01. Okay, so from here what we could do is go ahead and split up our viewport into two panes, one showing the shot camera and one the perspective, which we'll use to very easily reposition our shot camera. Under views, we'll head over to viewport configuration. Underneath the layout tab, notice we have different layouts we can choose from. Let's go ahead and choose the two viewport selection. Alright, with that selected, we'll go ahead and choose OK. And then from here, what we need to do is go ahead and just change up our views. So on our left side, let's go ahead and switch this camera to our shot camera. I'll go ahead and show the shaded mode of the character, just pressing F3. And then we can click in the right viewport and go ahead and switch this to the perspective camera. And again, go ahead and turn on the shaded mode for the character. Alright, so from here what we could do is start to reposition a few things. I'll take the camera interest and move it so it's about centered in the character. And then from here we can go ahead and select the camera, go ahead and move this back. Now this may look like a good angle for our turntable, but just to make sure, let's head over to our shot camera and press Shift F to turn on Show Save Frames. And you can see some of our characters getting cut off, which we don't want. So that's very important, again, that we make sure that when we're working with the shot camera, we turn on save frames, or any camera that we're going to render out for that matter. We want to make sure that show save frames is going to be turned on so we can see exactly what's going to be rendered out. So knowing this, we may want to consider taking this camera and just moving it back some more. And then we can go to the interest and adjust that so our character is more centered. Okay, so that looks much better than what we had before. So now that this is done, the next step is to set up a pivot right at the center and then parent our camera to that pivot so that as we pivot from the center, our camera will follow in a way where we can get a 360-degree turn very easily. Alright, so it's much better than selecting the camera and setting keys as we start to move its position. And what's nice is that we'll still have control over the position and orientation of the camera that we can use to add any extra effects we may want to, perhaps zoom ins or zoom outs. Alright, so let's go ahead and set this basic camera rig up. We can go to create helpers and then create a point helper. I'll zoom in here and we can just create that on the grid. And from here what I'd like to do is head over to the snap options at the toolbar, just right click and make sure grid points and pivot are checked on. And that's going to allow us to very easily take this helper and pivot it right at or position it so it's right at the center of our scene. And if you need to, you can go to wireframe mode just to make sure that that helper is centered. Okay, so that looks good. From here I'll go ahead and head over to the modify panel and just increase the size of this helper so it's easy to select. Can bring this to about a value of 200. Okay, so from here we can go ahead and turn off snap. Don't need that on anymore. And we'll now take our camera and link it to the helper. So I'll slide over the toolbar, middle mouse button, choose link. The camera selected will link right to the helper. Okay, so again, watch this. If we were to select that helper now and start to rotate it, notice how easily we can go ahead and set up a 360-degree rotation on this camera now, as opposed to selecting the camera and just moving it. Great. All right, so from here, let's go ahead and set up our 360-degree animation. I like to use several frames when doing this process so we can get a good view through the entire render. We don't want this motion to be fast where the person viewing our reel won't be able to see the detail we've added to our character. All right, so let's turn on auto key, and we'll go ahead and set a key on frame 0. And then from here, let's go ahead and add a frame. I'll hold down Control Alt and the right mouse button, and we'll go ahead and drag over to our left just to add just one more frame to this. All right, so we'll have our camera rotate 360 degrees on frame 160. So with the helper still selected, let's go ahead and set another keyframe. Right click, head over to the curve editor, and what we want to do is get to the z-axis of the object, select that last key, and set this to 360 degrees. Okay, so from here, let's go ahead and see what this is going to give us. I'll go ahead and head back over to the shot camera, and we'll hit play. Okay, great. So we have this nice 360-degree rotation going on, but you can see it kind of pauses when it gets to the end. That's happening because of the interpolation of this animation. We have our F curve slowing out of the first key and slowing into the last key. I'm going to show you this. Just go selecting the rotation Z track, can move back our F curve here, and you can see again we're slowing out of the first key, slowing into the last key. Instead, what we want is linear interpolation throughout. So let's go ahead and select both keys, and we'll set the interpolation to linear. What I also like to do is go to create out of range types and set this to linear, just in case we wanted to increase the time of our turntable for whatever reason. Now this is going to continue rotating indefinitely. Okay, so with that done, if we were to go ahead and hit play now, what we'll get is a much better turntable animation. All right, so again, that's a quick way we can establish turntables in Max. Now you can see that the camera is slightly off, and why is that happening? That's because our target also needs to be centered. Now it's barely noticeable, but you can kind of see our character floating around, especially looking at the feet. So I'll head back over to the perspective, and what we want to do here, we can turn off auto key. What we want to do here is go ahead and select this camera interest and make sure it's going to be centered right where our pivot is at, right at the center of our scene. So I'll go ahead and turn on wireframe on selected. Again, we can go ahead and turn on our snap tool and snap this interest right to the center. Okay, great. So now that that's done, now let's go ahead and check out our animation and see what we've come up with. Now the character will no longer slide. We get this nice 360-degree rotation. Okay, so we've learned how to create a turntable animation in Max using a basic camera rig. And though this was pretty basic, just using a helper as our camera's pivot, you'll find this type of setup used often for even more complex camera animations because it works very well.